The 9,999th meeting of the Security Council is called to order. The provisional agenda for this meeting is the situation in the Middle East. The agenda is adopted. In accordance with Rule 37 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite the representatives of Iraq, the Islamic Republic of Iran, the Syrian Arab Republic, and Turkey to participate in this meeting. It is so decided. In accordance with Rule 39 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite the following briefers to participate in this meeting. Mr. Geir Pedersen, Special Envoy of the Secretary General for Syria. Mr. Tom Fletcher, Under-Secretary General for Humanitarian Affairs and Emergency Relief Coordinator. And Ms. Majid Churbazi, Civil Society Representative. It is so decided. The Security Council will now begin its consideration of item 2 of the agenda. I now give the floor to Mr. Geir Pedersen.
Thank you, Mr. President. And let me welcome you, Ambassador Ibrahim Al-Olabi, in your new role as the permanent representative of Syria to the United Nations in New York. I wish you well in these historic times. Let me start with a point that bears repeating, because it is easy to forget. The interim authorities in Damascus are grappling with a massive legacy of war and autocracy. They have inherited not just the ruins of shattered buildings, but the deeper wreckage of a battered social fabric, decayed institutions, and a hollowed-out economy. Syria urgently requires international material assistance on a scale commensurate with its needs and ambition. We need to see the private sector's footprint back in Syria, including through nurturing Syria's domestic private sector to ensure that what exists survives and thrives. To achieve this will require more support from the region and the wider international community, and sustained sanctions and export control relief, reassurances to banks and companies, and an accelerated path of domestic reforms. It also, of course, requires political stability. Foreign Minister al-Shabani underlined to me when I met him recently in Damascus how vital international support is for Syria, as well as strongly calling for an end to foreign intervention. And I strongly echo this call. Mr. President, regrettably, the specter of external interference continues to loom large. This month has seen further intervention by Israel, including Syrian state media reporting an incident of Israeli killing of several Syrian soldiers, and an Israeli command landing south of Damascus, as well as further strikes in early September. Mr. President, this kind of external intervention is unacceptable and must stop. We must insist on the full respect for Syria's sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity, and that any security concerns are addressed based on international law, the 1974 agreement, and diplomatic dialogue. I hope that the meetings between Syria and Israel can lead to concrete results to bring about de-escalation and stability. Mr. President, in Sweden, the ceasefire announced by the Syrian authorities on 18 July has largely held. I continue to welcome the joint efforts of the United States and Jordan with Syria to address the crisis, recently embodied in the comprehensive joint statement on 16 September, containing a roadmap with several important and positive elements, including on accountability, humanitarian and commercial access, the restoration of services, reconstruction, detainees, security measures, integration, and reconciliation. However, a statement from a committee in Sweden aligned with Sheikh Hikmet al-Hijri rejected the statement and spoke of self-determination through self-administration or secession. Mr. President, it is absolutely vital that solutions are found that both safeguard the sovereignty, unity, independence, and territorial integrity of Syria, and addresses the legitimate and understandable fears among the Druze community about their safety, human rights, and political future within Syria, and that the state acts only as a protector and is not seen as a threat. Given the deep distrust and polarization, the situation needs confidence-building measures, and continued dialogue and diplomatic support. We have made clear our readiness to be helpful in this regard. I do wish to highlight that the 16 September statement includes a call by the Syrian government for the United Nations Commission of Inquiry to investigate the July events. This is a welcome opportunity for the existing and encouraging cooperation between the authorities and the United Nations on these issues to further develop. Mr. President, I also continue to encourage the publication of the conclusions of the National Committee for Investigation and Fact-Finding into the coastal events in March, and to see follow-up steps being taken. Both regarding the coast and Sweden, the Syrian public needs to see that abuses are both acknowledged and addressed in accordance with international standards and the Constitutional Declaration, so that all citizens and communities in Syria can develop confidence that there will be neither recurrence nor impunity. An example of the sensitivity of justice-related issues are recent events in Samaria, a predominantly Alawite area of Damascus, historically inhabited by families and relatives of former army personnel. In August, an armed group affiliated with the security forces of the interim authorities reportedly conducted a series of house raids there in the context of alleged eviction orders, with reports of violence and looting. I welcome that the tension in the neighborhood has abated with the intervention of the interim authorities themselves. But, Mr. President, and this is important, complex issues related to housing, land and property, and to transitional justice need to be addressed with care, prioritizing the protection of civilians based on the rule of law and in line with international standards. My recent visit to Damascus also further cemented my conviction of the centrality of transitional justice to the success of the entire political transition. We reiterate the readiness of the United Nations to support the Syrian National Commissions on Transitional Justice and Missing Persons, and to coordinate international assistance. Mr. President, on the Northeast, efforts continue to move forward with implementing the 10th of March agreement. We welcome the recent contacts between the interim authorities and the SDF and the exchanges on the key issues, including the critical question of military and security integration, and also a dialogue on political aspects and confidence-building measures. The fact that channels are active between the parties is positive, even if the challenges are very real. And we have had detailed discussions with the parties as they seek to find the path forward. Our messages to both is the same. This will require bold moves and genuine compromise. In areas under the control of the interim authorities, security challenges continue, with immense challenges be faced on security sector reform, on disarmament, demobilization and reintegration, and on the issue of foreign fighters too. Nor has the scores of terrorism faded. ISIL cells and extremist violence continue to threaten the fragile shoots of recovery. But let me also appeal to member states to heighten engagement on repatriation of their nationals in Al-Hol, and underline that the United Nations is ready to offer guidance and support in line with international human rights law and other applicable standards. Mr. President, Syria is without a legislature, and while regulatory authority can be exercised via presidential decree, the establishment of a credible interim legislative body is an important step so that urgent areas of reform during the transition can be addressed. In this regard, the preparation for the indirect elections of 2/3 of the members of an interim People's Assembly are now well underway, but no date has yet been formally announced. It is important that this process follows realistic timelines and is not rushed. While these indirect elections and also the appointment of the remaining 1/3 by the President are unique arrangements that reflect the transition's exceptional circumstances, transparency and broad inclusion, including the meaningful participation of women and the representation of all communities, will be essential to confer legitimacy. This must not be an exercise in rewarding loyalty, but in ensuring genuine representation and embracing difference. We recognize that there are major challenges in areas where disputes remain between the central authorities and areas outside their control. And that is why we have counseled caution and giving more space and time before taking irreversible steps. Equally, it is vital that all parts of Syrian society step forward and engage with the electoral process. This is a two-sided equation. The interim authorities have told me in the past that they view the People's Assembly as a chance to make the institutions overseeing the transition more inclusive than they have been until now. It is vital that this is what is happening in practice. Without genuine agreements with key stakeholders, the new assembly may start to function and the transitional process may continue, but critical voices could find themselves excluded. And this could flow through the subsequent steps of transition, including the shaping of a new constitution. Mr. President, let me also stress that in addition to our extensive engagement with the interim authorities and other parties, I and my office continue to meet with civil society and community representatives from all parts of Syria, inside and outside the country. Many share the tremendous sense of dynamism and opportunity in this current historic moment. Others express fears about a shrinking civil space, insufficient efforts on meaningful inclusion, and a rise in hate speech and communal tension. And Syrian women continue to share their own efforts to document violations against other Syrian women from across Syria. Violence against women remains a significant barrier to their engagement in public life, restricting further their ability to play consequential and equal roles and highlighting issues of public policy that the transition needs to consider from the perspective of women. Mr. President, to conclude, the Syrian interim authorities and the Syrian people are attempting a transition in the face of challenges and realities as complex and difficult as have been faced almost anywhere. And viewed by that standard, at least, we can point to remarkable changes in a short period of time. But equally, wider experience tells us that many political transitions in modern history have, alas, not been successful, that the key determinant of success have been genuine inclusion. Let me remind you all, we are speaking of a process of political transition over 5 years. Key steps ahead, particularly the new constitution, and that process of forming that new constitution, a free and fair election, but also other processes, will only succeed if all communities and critical groups are inside the tent in shaping the transition in Syria. The international community must support Syria and robustly stand against foreign intervention, but equally, the success of the transition will above all rest on the state acting as a state for all, not just in word, but also in deed, and the forging of genuine Syrian consensus, and as enabling all Syrians to voice their views, including their fears and political dissent, and to find genuine representation in the political transition. If this central challenge is mishandled, the consequences could be dire. Syria may find itself indefinitely gridlocked, unable to heal or rebuild, and at worst, slipping into fresh waves of strife and external intervention. This scenario is in nobody's interest, and this transition simply cannot fail. And I remain convinced that if the challenges are well handled and met with genuine negotiation and bold compromise, unity is within reach, and success against the odds is indeed possible. In this light, it was particularly reassuring to hear President Shara affirm that only dialogue, not force, can unite Syria. And as you know, he will be in New York next week for the high-level segment of the General Assembly, the first Syrian president to do so since 1967. Mr. President, we look forward to continue working with the Syrian authorities and Syrian partners to realize the promise of the commitments the authorities have made and to realize the promise of Resolution 2254. The United Nations stands ready to support efforts on all fronts. The journey must be Syrian-led and Syrian-owned, but let it be collective, courageous, and above all, inclusive. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank Mr. Pedersen for his briefing. I now give the floor to Mr. Tom Fletcher.
Thank you, Mr. President. And as ever, Special Envoy Pedersen has set out compellingly the political stakes and the case for success against the odds. A warm welcome to the new permanent representative of the Syrian Arab Republic. Your appointment comes at a critical time for Syria. Ahlan wa sahlan. As I told the Council last month, the international community has been resolute about the need to sustain momentum in support of recovery and hope for the people of Syria. The General Assembly High-Level Week, including this historic visit, will be a critical moment. In advance, I propose to take a step back and reflect on where we are on the humanitarian effort, what actions the UN and our humanitarian partners have been taking, and what we need from you to do more. Despite the profound changes underway in Syria and the opportunities that these have generated, Syria remains by any metric one of the largest humanitarian emergencies globally. More than 70% of the population still need some form of humanitarian aid. More than 9 million people are acutely food insecure, and some 7 million people are displaced internally. More than 4 million are refugees in neighboring countries. But let me share 3 positives. Firstly, thanks to the more collaborative, practical engagement that we have with the authorities in Damascus and beyond, we can now get aid where it's needed, within the country, much more easily than under the former regime. Movements that last year would have required lengthy, onerous navigation of front lines are now happening routinely. With the consent of the Syrian interim authorities, aid dispatched from Turkey supports activities throughout the country. So there are some communities in Syria that have started to receive UN support for the first time in years. Secondly, we've adapted our structures to the new context. Over 6 months, we've shifted to a much more efficient coordination model based in Damascus, under the leadership of the humanitarian coordinator, with subnational hubs. Thirdly, the easing of unilateral sanctions is removing hurdles to the reconstruction work, and that will bring down the humanitarian needs further. More carve-outs, including for more development activities, will be welcome. Through these efforts, and despite severe reductions in funding, the UN and our partners are now getting critical humanitarian assistance to nearly 3.5 million people across Syria, on average every month. That's a 25% increase on this time last year. So we're getting life-saving help to displaced people and other vulnerable communities, food for 1 million people, subsidized bread for 2 million more each month, medical procedures for 2 million each month, support for the public health surveillance system, and a national immunization program that reached over 1.7 million children under the age of 5. We are also providing basic support like water trucking, shelter, healthcare to people, largely women and children, in displacement camps in the north, including Al-Hol and Al-Raj. We are prioritizing emergency response as needed. Following the escalation in violence in the south, we have now delivered assistance to over 430,000 people per month in Asweda, Dara, and rural Damascus. We continue delivering aid to Asweda through convoys organized with the Syrian Arab Red Crescent. And while we're still navigating a tense security environment there, our deliveries and staff movements have become more regular over the last month, now using the reopened highway from Damascus. In fact, our team are on the ground there today, and we are now reaching most of our target population in the south. I join the Special Envoy in welcoming the roadmap agreement announced this week by Syria, Jordan, and the US. Our team in Damascus will continue to coordinate with authorities on sustaining and expanding the flow of aid. I hope this also lays the groundwork for further stabilization that facilitates full resumption of commercial routes to Asweda and, very importantly, functioning markets. These corridors are essential to maintain the flow of goods, stabilize markets, and reduce the reliance on humanitarian aid. At the same time, we are also working alongside authorities to prioritize more sustainable interventions throughout the country that strengthen institutional capacities. WHO, UNICEF, and partners are rehabilitating hospitals and health centers throughout the country, supporting the transition to the Syrian interim authorities. UNICEF and partners are rehabilitating water stations, wells, sewer networks to ensure reliable access to clean and safe water. WFP, FAO, and partners are working with national authorities to strengthen social safety nets, support rehabilitation of critical irrigation infrastructure, and of the bread value chain to ensure the continuous production of fresh bread. And as I mentioned when I briefed the Council from Damascus in December, Syria's women continue to have a vital, indispensable role in delivering humanitarian assistance and supporting Syria's recovery. And I look forward to hearing more on this theme from Ms. Shubaji. Mr. President, despite this progress, I warn again that we risk missing a rare opportunity for the people of Syria. Our humanitarian appeal this year is only 18% funded, meaning we can reach just a fraction of those in need. And just when organizations are seeking to expand their operations and have the opportunity to work more efficiently, they are instead forced to cut programs, reduce support, lose staff. Hospitals, communities, safe spaces for women and girls have been closed as a consequence of funding cuts, exacerbating protection risks, including of more early marriage and gender-based violence. And while announcements of investment agreements are encouraging, tangible, targeted development projects are still slow to materialize. Now, this real but fragile opportunity that we have is especially stark when we consider the millions of Syrians who have been uprooted by years of conflict. Since December, and the number has gone up this morning, over 900,000 refugees and 1.9 million people displaced internally have now returned to their home areas. And we're working with them to help them meet basic needs, rebuild damaged homes, build livelihoods, clear munitions. As one example, in June, July, 305 families with urgent medical needs voluntarily departed Al-Hol camp for Al-Raqqa, Aleppo, and Homs governorates. Several UN agencies supported the organization of that movement and support upon arrival, dignity kits for women and girls, solar lights, other household items, and ready-to-eat meals. But without more funding, those efforts will fall short, threatening the sustainability of these returns. The shift from the warmer summer months to the biting cold of winter adds to the urgency. Now, according to UNHCR, about 18% of Syrian refugees in the region plan to return to Syria within the next year. And that's a major increase from this time last year, but it's fewer than earlier in the year. And among the key barriers cited by those surveyed are lack of housing, access to livelihoods and employment, and security concerns. So we need to make those priorities. Mr. President, our resident and humanitarian coordinator in Damascus, Mr. Adam Abdelmullah, concluded his term last week, and in his parting remarks, he recognized the difficulties that still lie ahead, but emphasized his optimism, grounded in the strength and resilience of the Syrian people. This will require our collective, active, sustained support. This time next year, I would dearly love to report that we are substantially scaling down our emergency humanitarian operations in Syria. Not because funding cuts have forced our hand, but because the international community has made the necessary investments in Syria's future and in Syrian leadership. So let me conclude by reiterating my key asks that could help us get to that point. First, preserve stability. Only your consistent, sustained engagement to prevent renewed violence can create the conditions for genuine recovery. Second, fund the humanitarian response. Help us capitalize on access to surge more support in the coming months and save more lives and help more Syrians return home. And third, enable Syrian-led recovery. Translate these encouraging pledges into concrete investment and expand support for large-scale recovery, reconstruction, development, creating livelihoods, rebuilding homes, restoring essential services, and ultimately restoring hope for Syrians, but also, and as we prepare for one of the most consequential UN high-level weeks in a generation, for all of us who believe that diplomacy has not lost its value and its vigor. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank Mr. Fletcher for his briefing. I now give the floor to Ms. Majid Churbazi.
Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, members of this esteemed council. My name is Majd Sharbaji. I'm a Syrian entrepreneur, director of the non-governmental organization Basamat, and a civic activist promoting peaceful dialogue. Allow me to express my gratitude to you for giving me this opportunity. I would especially like to thank the mission of the Republic of Korea to the UN for its kind invitation. And I thank the Syrian Forum for its tireless efforts that allowed me to be here today. I'm honored to stand before you as a representative of Syrian women who have paid dearly for freedom and dignity, to highlight the role of Syrian women in civil society and in the business community. Ladies and gentlemen, Syria has been freed from the grip of tyranny, from a regime that practiced the most horrific forms of repression, subjecting the people to murder, torture, humiliation, and displacement. Today, Syrians are overjoyed that this nightmare is over, but anxiety is ever present. Will we be able to steadily move towards a stable transition? As I speak to you, I carry with me the voices of more than 500,000 martyrs, nearly 200,000 forcibly disappeared, and 14 million refugees and forcibly displaced. More than half of them are IDPs. The Syrian cause has not been settled yet, and it will not be settled until justice is achieved. In this context, I would like to express my deepest condolences for the civilian lives lost in the tragic and violent events we've witnessed this year. The pain of their loved ones is our pain. Transparent and comprehensive transitional justice is the only path to an inclusive political transition that restores trust among Syrians and ensures that this tragedy is not repeated. We recognize that we are at a delicate juncture, but any failure could undo the enormous sacrifices made by our people. Therefore, our commitment as Syrians today is firm and clear. We are committed to the success of the political transition and building a just and democratic state based on citizenship rights without discrimination, with no return to authoritarianism. I am honored to be from the city of Daraya, the cradle of the Syrian revolution, the city that broke free from the grip of fear and raised a rose in the face of bullets. The rose protest in Daraya carried a clear, peaceful message. Our right to freedom will not be taken away by violence. I am truly proud to be a daughter of Daraya, which stood firm against extremism and sectarian violence, which did not allow extremists to use its territory to attack innocent people in the surrounding suburbs. But when the first peaceful protester was killed by the regime's bullets, a red line was crossed. That we could not condone. We then vowed that those who cross this line and those who order the killing of innocent people shall not escape accountability. This is the source of our strength. No one can break the will of a people, but we will also not accept impunity. We have gained our freedom and we will complete our victory by holding the criminals accountable and ensuring that the tragedy is not repeated. I was detained with many others and I was tortured. I spent 7 months in prison. I was released, but thousands, including my husband, Abdulrahman Kamoun, and his brothers, paid with their lives for bearing the torch of peace. My detention lasted for 7 months, during which I endured the torment of torture, but I held on to my humanity and refused to internalize the cruelty of my torturer. Even behind bars, I continued to believe in the peacefulness of our revolution. I led a hunger strike that resulted in the release of 83 detainees, and I raised awareness among female prisoners of citizenship, politics, and transitional justice. This experience has taught me that human strength is not measured by the ability to scream or retaliate, but by the ability to stand firm, uphold justice, and show mercy in the most difficult of circumstances. After my release from prison, I sought refuge in Lebanon. I continued my mission to empower Syrian women intellectually, economically, and politically. Hundreds of women have found new opportunities thanks to small civil society initiatives, proving that when women rise, society as a whole rises. I realized that change is always possible, no matter how harsh the circumstances. Today, it is the responsibility of the nascent Syrian state to give society, and women in particular, priority as the state endeavors to restore what has been lost and guarantee a decent life for all Syrians. Reconstruction, at its core, should be nationally owned. But I call on the international community to support the new Syrian state to enable it to succeed in this process. Your Excellencies, despite the fall of the authoritarian regime, the challenges remain daunting. 16.5 million Syrians are in need of humanitarian assistance. More than half the population suffer from food insecurity. For millions of refugees, conditions for a safe and dignified return are not met. And we continue to suffer discrimination and mistreatment at border crossings, embassies, and airports. As for the economy, the old regime left us with a legacy of corruption, favoritism, and lack of transparency, which undermined any potential for development. Reconstruction cannot be just about repairing physical damage. It should be about introducing a new value system based on transparency and accountability, so that the practices of the past are not repeated. Your Excellencies, as we all know, the United Nations has always faced a major dilemma, balancing between the principle of sovereignty and the duty to protect peoples. In this context, I recall that the Charter of the United Nations starts with "we the peoples." We the peoples, not we the governments. This should be the compass that guides the work of the United Nations. Against this background, I call on you, permanent and non-permanent members of this august council, to prevent any attempts to destabilize Syria and undermine its security, so that the efforts of civil society and the international community can take root and bear fruit. The political transition process in my beloved country must be supported. It must be Syrian-led and Syrian-owned. I also call on the international community, through this esteemed council, to intensify efforts to build national capacities and support quality education, as education is the real bulwark against the resurgence of any future sectarian conflict or violence. Education, education, education. It is the best guarantee for a better future for our children. I also take this opportunity to call on my government to ensure that the political transition process is inclusive and that women and all religious and ethnic components of the Syrian society can participate on an equal footing in decision-making. Priority should be given to reforming Syrian institutions, both government and civil institutions, and empowering women economically through training, loans, business incubators, and development partnerships. International investments and support must be coordinated to achieve sustainable development and to build democratic institutions. I also call on my country to be fully transparent in its communication with citizens and announce its plans clearly. The government must ensure that transitional justice is a path towards redress and reconciliation, not revenge or exclusion. I encourage the government to utilize the expertise of Syrians at home and abroad, who are ready to put their knowledge at the service of the new state. Your Excellencies, we are now free from tyranny, and this is our greatest joy, but the success of the transition is our biggest bet. Today, we are at a historic crossroads. Let's share the responsibility. Let's ensure that Syrians are given the opportunity to live in dignity, not just to survive, but to thrive and rebuild the country they deserve. I thank you.
I thank Ms. Chorbaji for her briefing. I now give the floor to those council members who wish to make statements. I give the floor to the representative of Denmark.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I thank Special Envoy Pedersen and Undersecretary General Fletcher for their briefings. Let me also thank you, Ms. al-Shubashi, not only for your statement, but also for your tireless activism and advocacy for women in Syria. I also welcome the participation of the new permanent representative of the Syrian Arab Republic in today's meeting. Welcome to the Council. Ahla wa sahla. Mr. President, as we reflect on the past 9 months in Syria, it is clear that much progress has been made. Syria is a very different country than before December 8. Much remains to be done, but it has made significant strides for its people, its stability, and its future. We look forward to President al-Shaara's participation in the General Assembly next week, which we hope will mark the new beginning of a new and stronger relationship between Syria and the United Nations, a relationship which supports a new framework for the UN's presence in the country. Mr. President, in this spirit, allow me to focus on 3 core areas. First, priority must be given to implementing an inclusive and transparent political process in line with Resolution 2254. We hope that the selection of candidates to the People's Assembly will be the first of many steps towards democracy. This new People's Assembly needs to be generally inclusive of all Syrians, including Syria's women, as we just heard. Without the full, equal, and meaningful participation of Syrian women in the transitional process, it will not only lack legitimacy, but also lack the input of more than half of Syria's population. It's not only the right thing to do, it's the smart thing to do. We also urge for the elections to the People's Assembly in Soweto and in the Kurdish areas to be organized as soon as possible. Second, Mr. President, the internal security situation remains highly volatile. We urge the transitional government to demonstrate to its people that it's able to control and rein in all armed forces under its command. This is crucial for the sense of trust and security of all Syrians, regardless of ethnicity, religion, or gender. In northeast Syria, we urge the transitional government and SDF to engage in further dialogue to move forward in implementing the agreement from March. The UN has offered assistance in mediation in this regard. Last month, this Council spoke with one voice condemning the attacks in Soweto. Denmark reiterates the condemnation forcefully today. We take note of yesterday's roadmap towards security in Soweto and trust that its transitional government continues to ensure credible, swift, transparent, and impartial investigations in line with international standards. We reiterate our deep concern over Israel's strikes on Syrian territory, including Damascus, which creates a more dangerous security landscape. We also reiterate our call for the full implementation of the 1974 agreement between Syria and Israel. Israel must withdraw from the area of separation, and UNDAF must be able to carry out its mandate. Third, Mr. President, progress must be made to improve the humanitarian situation affecting communities across Syria, which are facing increasing challenges regarding access to livelihoods and services. The fundamental reason for this is obvious: decades of economic mismanagement and 14 years of devastating conflict. Added to this is the severe economic crisis, along with housing, land, and property issues. As we heard from Ms. Shubashi, harnessing the full potential of Syria's population, including its women, will be critical in reviving and developing its economy. Denmark will continue to play its part. We have long been and remain committed as a major donor to Syria. We urge all member states to join us to increase their financial assistance to humanitarian efforts rather than the funding cuts we heard USG Fletcher describe. Mr. President, in closing, the path ahead for Syria will not be simple nor without hardship, but it can be transformative. The international community, including this Council, must support it along the way. We owe this to the Syrian people who suffered so much and fought so hard to get where we are today. Denmark looks forward to working with all Council members and with Syria to this end. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Denmark for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Russian Federation.
Mr. President, we thank the Special Envoy for Syria, Geir Pedersen, and the UN Under-Secretary General for Humanitarian Affairs, Tom Fletcher. We thank them for their detailed assessments of the situation in the Syrian Arab Republic. And we listened very carefully to the statement made by Mr. Chudbaji. We know that despite the efforts made by the new Syrian authorities, the socio-economic situation in Syria remains very unstable. These are the consequences of the conflict, of the ongoing instability and destroyed infrastructure. In order to overcome these challenges, Syria needs to be helped. We reaffirm our readiness to assist the Syrian authorities. It's based on long-standing historical friendship between our peoples, and this was confirmed during the recent visit of the Syrian interagency delegation led by Foreign Minister Shaybani to Moscow, and by the visit to Damascus by the Russian delegation headed by Deputy Prime Minister Novak. A practical step from the international community towards Damascus would be not only the lifting of all sanctions which were imposed bypassing the UN Security Council, which are illegal and should be, as a matter of principle, excluded from international practice, but also the launching of economic growth mechanisms. And this requires investment, long-term projects, and support from all states that consider themselves friends of Syria. At the same time, we must not forget Syria's urgent humanitarian needs. We highly value the efforts of UN humanitarian agencies, which provide assistance to about 3.5 million people each month. And we agree that with adequate funding, the UN could do much more. Unfortunately, Syria's humanitarian appeal has a negative record of only being 15% financed, which is below the average for other UN humanitarian operations. We believe efforts must be intensified to ensure sustainable and predictable funding here. We note with concern that more than 16.5 million Syrians still urgently need assistance, and this makes this crisis one of the world's worst humanitarian crises. Food security is especially critical because this is the area that remains the most fragile because of the very unfavorable climate conditions, including the severe droughts in recent years. Such a situation severely reduces the country's possibility in the area of its own agricultural production capacity. And under these conditions, it's vital to increase food supplies, but also to introduce climate-resilient agricultural technologies. It's also important to support the UN Secretariat's so-called anticipatory approaches to crisis response. At the same time, unfortunately, despite Syria's declared readiness to build good neighborly relations with all regional states, not all neighbors of Syria are willing to help it stand on its own 2 feet. In particular, Israel has taken full advantage of the turbulent transitional period in Syria. Since December 2024, West Jerusalem has occupied large areas in southern Syria and is regularly striking Syrian territory and is openly interfering in the country's internal affairs. We condemn Israel's actions. They are at variance with international law. They violate Syrian sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity. We demand the immediate withdrawal of Israeli forces from occupied lands and a return to the compliance with the disengagement agreement on the Golan Heights of 1974. We are convinced that Israel's security interests can only be served through pragmatic cooperation with Damascus. Attempts to destabilize Syria and fuel separatist tendencies risk plunging the country into chaos and fostering conditions for creating a fertile ground for terrorism. We categorically oppose the use of Syrian territory as a battleground for geopolitical rivalries or settling scores amongst various states. Mr. President, as Syria is moving towards restoring sovereignty and building state institutions representing all Syrians, Syria will face many, not just outside, but also internal challenges. So there is a troubling trend, for example, in the recent months, has been the wave of violence involving ethno-religious minorities which swept throughout the country. The March massacre of the Alawites on the western coast, clashes in July in Sueda, and rising tensions between Damascus and the Kurdish northeast highlight very clearly the fragility of the process of restoring Syrian national unity. Respecting the interest of all ethnic and confessional groups of Syrian society is key to future stability and prosperity. And in this regard, we are encouraged by Damascus' claim that they're committed to the rule of law and the protection of all citizens, regardless of their religion or ethnicity. Holding accountable those who are responsible for violence against civilians during the tragic events in Latakia, in Tartus, and the armed clashes in Soweto would lay the foundation for lasting peace and would restore trust amongst Syria's diverse communities towards the authorities. We also support the full and good faith implementation of the agreement between the central government and the Trans-Euphrates region. We are concerned by the high level of the terrorist threat, which remains high. It was evidenced in June in the attack on the Antiochian Orthodox Church of the Prophet Elijah in eastern Damascus. Syrian authorities must take all necessary measures to combat terrorism, especially they need to pay close attention to the issue of foreign terrorist fighters who have no place in Syria's future. And we expect that Damascus will pay very close attention to these worrying trends. And in this context, we appreciate Syria's efforts to ensure the safety of Russian citizens and facilities in the country. One of the most pressing tasks for Syria's leadership in the near future is strengthening state institutions and establishing effective governance nationwide. We support further steps made by Damascus to advance the transitional period in line with the UN Security Council Resolution 2254, with the participation of all Syrians and UN assistance. It's important to make sure that this process be genuinely inclusive and be aimed at restoring national unity. We will closely monitor the upcoming parliamentary elections this month and sincerely wish the Syrian people success in overcoming internal divisions and embarking on a path of progress and reconstruction. All of Syria's time-tested friends, including Russia, are invested in this outcome. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Russian Federation for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of the United States.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Special Envoy Geir Pedersen and Undersecretary General Tom Fletcher for your briefings. And thank you as well to Ms. Majid Shorbaji for sharing your story and compelling perspective. And I would also like to welcome the representative of the Syrian Arab Republic with us today. The United States calls upon the Syrian government to seize the opportunity afforded by President Trump's sanctions relief. All Syrians deserve security, stability, and prosperity, and they rightly expect their leaders to deliver. We are under no illusions about the scale of the challenge. After 5 decades of vicious and predatory Assad rule, we know it will take time to rebuild and that there will be some setbacks. But for Syria's new leaders to succeed and maintain international support, they must ensure that every Syrian has a voice in how their country is governed, that every Syrian is protected regardless of their ethnicity or religion, and that there is zero tolerance for abuses, no matter the perpetrator or the victim. Only with that shared respect and common purpose can the country move forward. Syria's new leaders also need the support of foreign partners, and especially those within the region. In that respect, we applaud countries like Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Turkey, and Jordan that are stepping up to support Syrian institutions and restart the economy. President, the U.S. government has worked with the Syrian government and our Jordanian partners to design a roadmap to reconciliation after the horrific violence that occurred in Soweto, and we hope all parties involved will take that opportunity to build a future together as a nation of equal rights and shared obligations. We know many member states share our vision of a Syria free from terrorism and Iranian interference, committed to peaceful relations with its neighbors, free of chemical weapons, and with an open and transparent economy. We urge those member states to contribute to stabilization and reconstruction in Syria. The United States is doing its part by removing barriers previously imposed by our sanctions. For example, last month, the U.S. Department of Commerce announced it would ease licensing requirements for civilian exports to Syria. Already, these steps have accelerated critical work to rehabilitate Syria's telecommunications, sanitation, power generation, and civil aviation infrastructure. They represent our follow-through on President Trump's promise to allow a new start for the people of Syria as they seek a stable and prosperous future. In this vein, we also continue to pursue avenues to ease UN sanctions on Syria. We call for the Council and the international community to support these efforts. We will continue to help Syria rebuild ties with its neighbors as a key element of regional peace and security. Constructive dialogue between Syria and Israel will only add to stability and prosperity for the region. We will also continue working with Syria to prevent the resurgence of ISIS. A critical element of success in this effort is the commitment by all member states with nationals detained or displaced in northeast Syria to relocate them as soon as possible, either to their home country or a safe third country, and to work together to find solutions for remaining populations. President, we look forward to the events of High Level Week, including the ministerial hosted by the government of Iraq, focused on repatriation and rehabilitation of these third country nationals in northeast Syria. And we expect more commitments to this effort during High Level Week. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the United States for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Panama.
Gracias.
Thank you, Mr. President. We join in the thanks for the Special Envoy Geir Pedersen, the Undersecretary General Tom Fletcher, and Ms. Majd Turbaji for their briefings. The humanitarian situation in Syria remains very serious. 16.5 million people require assistance, of which 7 million are internally displaced and 4.7 million are refugees. Insecurity, the presence of explosive remnants of war, and the extreme drought are exacerbating needs affecting food, health, and the protection of the population. Therefore, Panama recognizes the commendable efforts of OCHA despite adverse conditions and reaffirms the importance of the secure and sustained access of humanitarian assistance to all communities without discrimination or conditions. Equally, we welcome the announcement of the roadmap for Soweto. This is an initiative which reflects a commitment on various different important aspects by the Syrian interim authorities, with the backing of Jordan and the United States, to promote reconciliation. At the same time, Panama underscores that this effort represents an opportunity to strengthen territorial unity, and so that Soweto can not only heal its physical wounds, but also move forward in equity and hope together with all Syrians. Panama reiterates its support for the sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity of Syria, and highlights the value of the 1974 disengagement agreement and the United Nations Disengagement Observer Force, UNDOF. We stress the importance of all parties fully respecting that agreement and supporting UNDOF's mandate. We also welcome the upcoming participation of the interim president, Ahmed al-Sharaa, in the United Nations General Assembly. We believe that this step provides a valuable opportunity to reaffirm Syria's commitment to multilateralism, to the principles of Resolution 2254, and to international monitoring of a sustainable political solution. Another persistent challenge are the activities of Daesh, whose adaptability and territorial expansion, including through the use of emerging technologies, represent a constant threat to national and regional stability. Panama is aware that rebuilding institutions, governance, security, and inclusive electoral processes are things that will require time and international support. We are paying close attention to the intention of holding parliamentary elections that have been called partially for this week, with the understanding, however, that they should be held when the circumstances are appropriate, because thus they would be able to represent an important step in the country's political process. In any case, we reiterate the importance that they be held when they can be organized appropriately, that they be held with transparency, inclusivity, and integrity to make sure that they are broadly accepted. Logistical delays and the complexity of organizing elections in a post-conflict context are undoubtedly posing challenges that could affect confidence in the results, and which makes UN support all the more important. Equally, we consider that the political participation of women remains minimal, and therefore we urge all parties to implement concrete measures to make sure that the voices of women can be heard, protected, and empowered. We reiterate that the effective inclusion of women is essential for any authentic and sustainable peace process. The lasting stability of Syria will only be possible if women can participate equitably and safely in public life. Mr. President, as the Arab proverb goes, if the foundation is weak, the roof will soon collapse. Now then is the time to buttress a political transition process that brings together all voices and which articulates its ideas to move away from the errors of the past. Only thus will it be possible to build a different future, a Syria in which every institution serves to protect, in which every voice is heard, and every human right is respected. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Panama for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Algeria.
Thank you, President. I have the honor to deliver this statement on behalf of the A3+, namely Guyana, Sierra Leone, Somalia, and my own country, Algeria. At the outset, the A3+ extends their sincere appreciation to Special Envoy Geir Pedersen and Undersecretary General Tom Fletcher for their important briefings. President, the Syrian people look to tomorrow with both hope and apprehension, as expectations remain high while challenges are complex and difficult to overcome. As we have consistently highlighted, the A3+ stands ready to engage constructively to help the Syrian people to achieve their legitimate aspiration and build a brighter future for their country. A future free from the legacy of violence and instability. In this regard, we wish to underscore the following 5 points. First, silencing the guns and fostering dialogue among all Syrians is essential for the country's stability. we welcome the efforts of the Syrian government and its endeavors to extend security and stability throughout all of its territory, including the roadmap for resolving the crisis in Suwaida and stabilizing southern Syria. The A3+ calls for a nationwide ceasefire and stresses that arms must be under the exclusive authority of the Syrian state. In this context, we call for the implementation of the March agreement with the SDF. Continued confrontation risks fueling instability and creating fertile ground for the resurgence of terrorism, particularly Daesh. Second, we reiterate the importance of an inclusive, Syrian-led and Syrian-owned political process. It is essential that Syrians themselves determine the fate of their country. Legislative elections represent an important milestone, but they must be organized carefully and inclusively and in a manner that ensure credibility and legitimacy. Third, the international community, and in particular the United Nations, has a crucial role to play in supporting Syria throughout its transition. The A3+ calls for constructive engagement between the UN and the Syrian authorities and reaffirms its strong support for the United Nations and the work of the Special Envoy. Fourth, external interference can only aggravate Syria's fragile situation. The A3+ calls on all regional and international actors to refrain from actions that could further destabilize the country. We strongly condemn Israel's military operations, which constitute a blatant violation of international law, including Article 2 of the United Nations Charters. We also call for the full implementation of the 1974 disengagement agreement and recall that the occupied Golan Heights is an integral part of Syria, as reaffirmed by Security Council Resolution 497. We demand an immediate end to Israeli incursion and the complete withdrawal from the occupied territory. Fifth, the humanitarian needs in Syria remain immense, while support is insufficient, despite the effort of OCHA. Rebuilding Syria requires the mobilization of the entire international community. Yes, the lifting of sanctions is a welcome step, but it is not enough. Without adequate assistance, refugees and displaced persons will be unable to return home, and Syria will not be able to reconnect with development and prosperity. The A3 Plus calls all donors to honor their pledges and urges the international community to extend meaningful and sustained support to Syria. President, at this critical juncture, the A3 Plus reaffirms its unwavering support for Syria's sovereignty, unity, independence, and territorial integrity. We remain fully convinced that only a Syrian-led and Syrian-owned process, supported by genuine international solidarity, can pave the way toward realizing the aspirations of Syrian people for peace, for development, and for dignity. The A3 Plus stands ready to continue working alongside the Syrian people and with all partners to achieve this goal. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Algeria for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Slovenia.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to thank Special Envoy Pedersen and Under Secretary General Fletcher for their briefings, as well as Ms. Maj Shorbaji, representing civil society, for her remarks. I also extend warm welcome to the newly appointed permanent representative of Syria, Ambassador Olabi. I wish you every success, and I assure you of my country's full support. Mr. President, the ambassador's appointment offers us a glimpse of what a new Syria could look like. After long shadows, hope is rising. A vision of a Syria where the scars of war are not forgotten, but serve to shape a better future for all Syrians. Allow me to make 3 points. First, the pain endured by the Syrian people over the past 14 years under Assad's rule has been immense. We understand deep frustration with the inaction of the international community. Yet while injustice is impossible to forget, it is time to try to look beyond that. Multilateralism ensures collective security where every country has a voice. As firm believers in this principle, we strongly support a renewed partnership, a reset between the United Nations and Syria, and stand ready to help make it a reality. Second, we acknowledge steps taken by the transitional authorities, including the current formation of the People's Assembly as a legislative body. Transparency and genuine inclusion, along with pluralism, remain essential for any lasting political transition, in line with Resolution 2254. In this regard, the full, equal, and meaningful participation of women must be guaranteed. We strongly condemn recent atrocities and sectarian targeting of civilians in Soweto, Latakia, and elsewhere. Equal protection from the state, accountability, and transitional justice, in line with international standards, must be central to national efforts. Long-term stability also requires comprehensive security sector reform and credible disarmament, demobilization, and reintegration programs. We encourage the interim authorities to continue cooperation with the United Nations and civil society, whose expertise will be crucial for a just and lasting peace. We welcome the roadmap between Syria, Jordan, and the United States aimed at resolving the crisis in Soweto province. We again urge all actors to respect Syria's sovereignty, territorial integrity, and unity, and to refrain from any actions that could escalate conflict or prolong human suffering. External military interventions risk destabilizing Syria and the wider region. This is in no one's interest. We join those who condemn the latest Israeli attacks on targets in Homs and Latakia. we reiterate our call to Israel to fully respect the 1974 disengagement agreement. Third, violence must end and civilians must be protected. We are deeply concerned by reports of sectarian violence and the implications of continuing hostilities and extensive damage on the prospects of recovery, particularly its disproportionate impact of women and girls. Continued efforts will help counter hate speech and the spread of disinformation, reduce polarization, and promote reconciliation and mutual understanding among Syria's diverse communities. And finally, urgent humanitarian needs are still a reality for millions of people. This year's devastating drought may increase the number of food insecure people. Remaining hostilities are driving further displacement. Among the most vulnerable are women and girls who face sexual violence in conditions of displacement, depravity, and insecurity. It is imperative that aid reaches all in need swiftly, safely, and without obstruction. We support the tireless efforts of the United Nations, especially Special Envoy Pedersen, whose role remains essential in supporting an inclusive, Syrian-led and Syrian-owned political process. We stand ready to work with Syria, this Council, and the international community to support a peaceful, stable, and prosperous future, one the Syrian people waited for so long and so rightfully deserve. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Slovenia for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Pakistan.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President. We thank Special Envoy Geir Pedersen and Under Secretary General Tom Fletcher for their detailed complimentary briefings. Their updates highlight the immense challenges that Syria faces today. We also thank Ms. Shubarji for her statement, and we welcome the presence of the new permanent representative of Syria in the Council today, and also welcome the participation of Iran, Turkey, and Iraq in this meeting. Mr. President, Syria has endured more than a decade of devastating conflict and immense human suffering. Its people have borne the brunt of destruction, displacement, and hardship on an unimaginable scale. Mr. Pedersen rightly pointed to the massive legacy of conflict and civil strife, the imperative of economic and political stability driven by genuine inclusion and dialogue. And he also referred to external intervention by Israel, terming it unacceptable and that it must stop. And in this council, we know very well how this issue of foreign interference intertwined with occupation has been a perennial problem and a key destabilizing factor that manifests itself across the situations in the Middle East. Mr. President, despite these challenges, the recent developments have provided a glimmer of hope for Syria. This opportunity must be seized, and the Council has a special responsibility here. We believe that the path ahead must be marked by political progress, economic recovery, security stabilization, and respect for Syria's sovereignty and territorial integrity. In this regard, first, it is essential that the political transition in Syria proceed in a smooth, credible, and inclusive manner. We note with optimism the parliamentary elections scheduled for this month. These elections should serve as a stepping stone toward broader national reconciliation. It is imperative that all political and social groups in Syria are meaningfully represented and allowed a genuine stake in shaping their country's future. Second, the lifting of multiple sanctions on Syria is a welcome development. Syria possesses a vibrant and talented population and diaspora. Its people are spirited and eager to contribute to national recovery. With the easing of restrictions, the conditions are ripe for investments in construction, technology, and other productive sectors. Such investments can serve as powerful engines for reconstruction, job creation, and economic revitalization, which are indispensable for durable peace. It is imperative that these opportunities are fully realized. Third, and related to the above, is the fact that Syria's stability is inseparable from the question of security, which remains twofold. On the one hand, the security situation in areas such as Suweda, the western coast, and the northeast remains fragile and demands a healing touch and action-oriented approach. We welcome the efforts by Syria, Jordan, and the United States aimed at stabilizing Suweda and the south of Syria. On the other hand, the persistent threat posed by terrorist groups continues to endanger not only Syria but the wider region. The presence of foreign terrorist fighters underscores the urgency of this challenge. These concerns must be addressed comprehensively through both political and security measures, including the implementation of the disarmament, demobilization, and reintegration reforms. Fourth, all forms of external aggression against Syria must cease, and the occupation of Syrian territory post 8 December 2024 must be reversed. The occupation of the Syrian Golan must also end in full compliance with international law and Security Council resolutions. The 1974 disengagement agreement should be strictly adhered to, and any new security arrangements must have the consent of the concerned parties and the endorsement of the Security Council. President, Syria's road to lasting peace and stability requires sustained international solidarity, unwavering respect for its sovereignty and territorial integrity, and tangible support to address its humanitarian and economic challenges. Pakistan stands in full solidarity with the brotherly people of Syria, and we will continue to support all efforts aimed at consolidating a sovereign, unified, inclusive, peaceful, and prosperous Syria. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Pakistan for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of France.
Merci.
Thank you, Mr. President. First of all, I thank the Special Envoy of the Secretary General, Mr. Geir Pedersen, whose work throughout these years is to be commended, and we thank him for the presentation today. I also thank the Undersecretary General for Humanitarian Affairs, Mr. Tom Fletcher, who recalled for us the humanitarian urgency and the need to react to that. And I thank you, Madame Chirbaji. You're an important voice of the new Syrian civil society. I also would like to welcome the permanent representative of Syria here in New York, and I welcome the presence of the representative for Iran, Iraq, and Turkey. Mr. President, Syria is going through a historic time, and the challenge for the Council is very simple. How can we help? How we can mobilize around Syria as it's trying to emerge from a long and terrible period of civil war and an even longer period of tyranny? In order to build Syria for the purposes of peace in the region, the entire international community must provide it with all the necessary support, and that is our responsibility. And this challenge has three practical dimensions. First of all, given the security situation in Syria, it's crucial to maintain efforts together with Syrians to restore civil peace and protect all of Syrians without distinction. The recent violence have shown the scale of the challenges in restoring unity in the country and among all components of the Syrian society. The political will of the Damascus authorities are needed here. A firm attitude towards the troublemakers, as well as the openness and inclusivity, and the spirit of justice. And the report of the UN Independent Commission of Inquiry on the violence in the coastal areas is a basis for this work. The transitional justice has to progressively contribute towards healing of the wounds. France very warmly welcomes the roadmap agreed upon by Syria, Jordan, and the United States in order to resolve the crisis in the governorate of Sueda. This roadmap is a first step towards a sustainable escalation, hopefully a lasting one, and we support its swift implementation on the ground. A united and stable Syria also requires the eradication of the terrorist threat, and we call upon the Syrian authorities to intensify their fight against any resurgence of terrorist movement and to rid Syria of this scourge. The second dimension is humanitarian and economic. To meet the immense needs of the Syrian people, we must also provide massive humanitarian aid and help with the economic recovery. After decades of suffering and destruction, Syria is, and we've heard that today, is in severe economic distress. The suffering of the Syrian people is compounded by the worst drought the country has experienced in nearly 40 years. And in the face of this critical situation, it is our collective responsibility to facilitate the delivery of humanitarian aid throughout the territory. And we had the USG on that, and we support the work being done by humanitarian personnel, especially in the wake of the recent violence. We must work with UNHCR and other partners to establish a regional framework that allows Syria's talent and vital forces to return to the country and help build the Syria of tomorrow. The return of refugees from neighboring countries in particular has to be ensured for the refugees, for the rebuilding of Syria, and for the stability. Beyond that, the Syrian population has every talent to restore a dynamic economy which can make Syria into a hub of prosperity and innovation in the region, and France will support it any way we can to mobilize capital, public and private, and on the European level we have lifted the sanctions to facilitate this. And finally, the political and diplomatic dimension. France, in line with the Paris Declaration on Syria, is committed to supporting a successful Syrian transition that leads to lasting regional stability. This transition, of course, must be led by the Syrians through a process in which everyone feels that their voice is heard. The legislative election scheduled for the end of September, the first since the fall of the Assad regime, must mark the beginning of an inclusive and transparent political process. Syria must respect all of its conventions, Kurd, Druze, Sunni, Shiite, Alawite, and women must actively and equally participate in the rebuilding of Syria. This diversity has always been a major asset of the country. France, on the 13th of February, hosted an international conference where we helped define together with Syrians the principles and objectives of international support for the country. And we remain committed to a peaceful transition process that will allow the construction of a new Syria. Now, regionally and internationally speaking, this has to be fully integrated into Syria has to be fully integrated into the regional environment by rebuilding a new relationship with Lebanon based on the equality and mutual respect, in contradistinction to previous decades. But when it comes to Israel, Israel must end its military activities and shelling in the country and withdraw from the Golan area and seize the historic opportunity presented by a Syria eager to normalize relations with its neighbors. Mr. President, the President Shara in New York next week should be an opportunity for the Secretary General and the United Nations to define together the new kind of presence of the UN for the purposes of unity, sovereignty, and peace, reconstruction, and democracy, and the rebuilding of Syria. I thank you.
I thank the representative of France for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Greece.
Thank you, Mr. President. And let me thank Special Envoy Pedersen and Undersecretary General Tom Fletcher for their insightful briefings. I thank Mrs. Jurbaji, for highlighting the importance of women's participation in Syria's recovery. I also acknowledge the presence of the new Syrian ambassador, Mr. Ibrahim Olabi. Mr. Olabi, we welcome you to the Council as you strive for a new Syria at the UN. Mr. President, I want to highlight 3 points today. First, the vision of a new Syria will only be realized once a truly inclusive political transition has been achieved. Syria is a country of a tremendous wealth, a wealth that lies in its ethnic, religious, and cultural diversity. After years of suffering, all Syrians deserve a country in which they feel protected, safe, and included. In this context, we took careful note of the announcement of the selection of 2/3 of the country's legislative council by regional electoral committees. New legislative structures need to ensure democratic legitimacy and a fair representation for all. We regret the security conditions that led to the suspension of the electoral process in the Druze-dominated Shueida and the Kurdish-controlled governorates. We expect the political transition to include all Syrians, Muslims, Christians, Druze, Kurds, and importantly, women. It is clear that only if all religious and ethnic groups feel safe and politically represented can Syria move forward in its path for reconciliation, social cohesion, and economic development. It is encouraging in this regard that Syria's transitional president met with the Patriarch of Antioch last month, the leader of a community which has suffered a lot, especially in the Mar Elias Church terrorist attack this summer. Which brings me to my second point. Syria's volatile security landscape must be properly addressed, especially as the terrorist threat persists. Perpetrators of violence, regardless of affiliation, must be brought to justice in line with international norms. We welcome the roadmap agreed by Syria, Jordan, and the US on restoring stability in Shueida, expecting full accountability. Similarly, the report of the UN Commission of Inquiry on violations committed against civilians in coastal and western central Syria earlier this year must be followed up. We urge the interim authorities to do so. Equally, we hope that genuine progress on the implementation of the March agreement between Damascus and the SDF will be made possible. This in the context of wider efforts to assure safety and inclusivity for all Syrians. All regional actors must respect international law, refraining from incitement, threat, or the use of force, as well as malign influence or interference. Third, Syria needs to rebound as its economy is currently in disarray and humanitarian needs remain urgent. A wide sanctions regime targeting those responsible for serious human rights abuses. Syria needs to be rebuilt for the refugees and to return home, involving the diverse and wealthy Syrian diaspora to this end is necessary. In this sense, we reaffirm Syria's unity, independence, sovereignty, and territorial integrity, urging all to respect it fully. Mr. President, with the 80th session of the United Nations General Assembly now upon us, Syria stands at crossroads. We look forward to the address of Syria's transitional president next week. Certainly, a significant milestone in the country's history. We will remain in the country's history. We will remain hopeful in the country's history. We will remain hopeful, but also vigilant, especially about a new Syria which is inclusive for all and free from foreign interference. Greece stands at the side of the Syrian people and the United Nations along this path. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Greece for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of China.
Thank you, President. I thank Special Envoy Pedersen and USG Fletcher for their briefings. I listened attentively to the statement made by the civil society representative, Ms. Chobashi. I welcome the presence of the representatives of Syria, Iran, Iraq, and Turkey at today's meeting. China and Syria are friendly nations. China has always been committed to developing a friendly relationship that works for all Syrian people. We never interfere in Syria's internal affairs. We respect the choices made by Syrians themselves. In the current context, the international community should provide constructive support for an early return to peace and stability in Syria. The Syrian interim authorities should take concrete steps to positively respond to the concerns of the international community. I'll make 3 points. First, it is important to stay firmly committed to an inclusive political transition. China supports the Syrian interim authorities in making efforts on the basis of the principles laid out in Council Resolution 2254 to continue the dialogue and consultations with all parties in Syria, aim for internal reconciliation at an early date, and shape a broad-based and inclusive governance structure. Syria cannot afford another breakout of massive violence. It is important to take seriously the voices of all Syrian communities, respect their rights fully, and protect their safety equally. Syria will hold elections for the Interim People's Assembly. The UN should and could provide assistance in this regard. Second, it is essential to resolutely combat terrorism in all its forms and manifestations. With foreign terrorist fighters operating rampantly within its borders, the counterterrorism landscape is still daunting in Syria. As long as terrorists remain present, Syria will have difficulty getting back to the path of normal development. Syria should effectively fulfill its counterterrorism obligations by taking all necessary measures to combat all Council-listed terrorist organizations, including ETIM, and earn the trust of international community through tangible actions. Counterterrorism must follow a zero-tolerance approach and must leave no room for shielding and condoning terrorism or even exploiting it for political purposes. Third, it is imperative to help ease the humanitarian plight as soon as possible. The international community, especially traditional donors, should step up their humanitarian commitment and support Syrian humanitarian operations with sufficient funding. The parties in Syria should fulfill their obligations under international humanitarian law by ensuring unhindered humanitarian access, guaranteeing the safety and security of humanitarian workers, and facilitating humanitarian operations of the UN. We are confident that with the help of the international community, the Syrian people will ride out this difficult time. President, in dealing with the Syrian file, the international community should always abide by a fundamental principle. That is, the sovereignty, security, and territorial integrity of Syria must be fully respected by all. We call on Israel to cease its military operations against Syria and immediately withdraw from the Syrian territory. As a strategic partner of Middle East countries, China stands ready to join the international community to continue playing a constructive role in achieving lasting peace and stability in Syria and restoring peace and tranquility in a wider Middle East region. Thank you, President.
I thank the representative of China for the statement, and I give the floor to the representative of United Kingdom.
Thank you, President. And thank you, Special Envoy Pedersen and USG Fletcher for briefing us today. Thank you too, Ms. Chobashi, for your powerful testimony, which outlined the horrific toll the former regime had on your family and on the families of so many Syrians. The UK stands with you as you build a better future. I'd also like to take the opportunity to welcome to the Council the new Syrian Permanent Representative, and the UK looks forward to working with you in support of Syria's political transition and economic reconstruction. President, I'll make 3 points. First, the Syrian government has made progress in seeking to foster genuine national reconciliation and in laying the foundations for state institutions that work for and represent all of Syria. This includes recent steps towards holding indirect elections for the People's Assembly and the efforts of the Supreme Electoral Committee to consult across Syria and guarantee at least 20% of electors are female. We encourage the government to continue to prioritise women's meaningful participation in the political transition and to use this opportunity to take further steps to ensure a representative and inclusive political process. We also encourage further concrete progress in the negotiations between the Syrian Democratic Forces and the Syrian government to build towards a unified and more secure Syria. Second, we reiterate our call on Israel to refrain from actions that risk destabilizing Syria and to respect Syria's sovereignty and territorial integrity. The UK welcomes the ongoing engagement between Syria and Israel. Dialogue and diplomacy, not military action, will help achieve a more peaceful future for both countries and for the region. Third, we acknowledge the progress made on aid access in Suwaida, which USG Fletcher described for us, but call on parties to focus on a solution for peace. 180,000 people remain displaced in southern Syria, with significant humanitarian needs. We urge prioritizing restoration of critical infrastructure, such as water and electricity, as soon as possible. Likewise, as the new school year starts, we urge the government to assist those displaced to return home so that children can continue their schooling at this critical moment. We welcome the efforts of Syria, Jordan, and the United States in developing a roadmap to address the crisis in Suwaida and stabilize southern Syria. President, next week, we will see the historic visit of President al-Shara to the United Nations, where we look forward to hearing more details on his vision for a secure and prosperous Syria that delivers for the rights and needs of all Syrians. We reiterate the importance of this Council taking the necessary measures to bolster Syria's economy, including reforming UN sanctions. The UN can also play a crucial role in supporting Syria's transition, and in this regard, we look forward to hearing from the Secretary-General on his recommendations for the UN's future role and footprint in Syria. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the United Kingdom for the statement. Excuse me. I shall now make a statement in my capacity as the representative of the Republic of Korea. I thank Special Envoy Pedersen and USG Fletcher for their informative briefings, and I also take this opportunity to express my sincere appreciations to Ms. Churbazi for sharing compelling stories. We hope Ms. Churbazi's intervention today serves as a fresh reminder that ensuring inclusivity in economic recovery is also an imperative goal that should not be obscured because of security developments. Let me briefly touch upon the following 3 points. First, noting that this week's election were postponed, we call on Syria to exercise utmost caution in holding any further election that may lead to a divided Syria. Since the fall of the Assad regime, Council members have repeatedly called for a parliamentary election as a means to form a full government with a democratic legitimacy. As a member state with a history of holding its first elections under the auspices of the UN, we can also resonate with the Damascus aspirations to hold a national elections as soon as possible. Yet, the Korean Peninsula's painful history tells that having an election just in part of that country carries a significant risk of fragmentation. In addition to possible tragic military confrontation between nationals. An inclusive transition should be understood not as a formality, but as a nuanced and comprehensive process. In this regard, we call on Damascus to focus on creating a conducive environment for nationwide elections, including the finalization of SDF integration talks and announcing a clear plan to conduct future elections. Second, all foreign intervention and occupation should be halted immediately. While the security talks between Syria and Israel have given the international community a glimmer of hope amidst the ever-worsening regional security landscape, IDF airstrike and ground incursions in recent days gives little optimism for a better tomorrow. Respecting other countries' territorial integrity is the basic tenet of international relations, and all hostilities violating Syria's territorial sovereignty must stop. Lastly, we urge Syria to prioritize combating terrorism and preventing a resurgence of extremist ideologies. Recent weeks witnessed the deeply concerning re-emergence of both Daesh and the anti-government insurgency, adding yet another layer of security concern in the fragile situation. These very same security concerns are also cited as the main barriers to return by more than 75% of refugees abroad, further undermining prospects for durable resettlement and national reconciliation. We therefore urge Damascus to prioritize, at all costs, demobilizing and repatriating foreign terrorist fighters. Likewise, implementing robust vetting and rehabilitation measures should be realized to prevent extremists from taking charge of national security. And those responsible for sectarian violence must be held fully accountable. I now resume my function as Security Council President. I now give the floor to the representative of Syrian Arab Republic.
Mr. President, I congratulate you and your team on managing the work of the Security Council for this month. I would also like to thank Mr. Geir Pedersen, the Special Envoy for Syria, and Mr. Tom Fletcher, the Under-Secretary General for Humanitarian Affairs and Emergency Relief Coordinator, for their briefings. I would also like to welcome and show appreciation to Ms. Majd Shorbaji, the civil society representative, for her valuable briefing and for standing steadfast despite her bitter experience with the previous regime. This reminds us all of what we were liberated of. Allow me to reaffirm to her that the voice of the Syrian civil society will always be welcomed by this delegation, for this is the new Syria. I would also like to welcome your statements which appear to me have unified the Council on this historic opportunity for Syria and the region, as well as the United Nations. And you have all mentioned hope. You've mentioned hope. And I would like to add, on behalf of the government, that we will add to hope action. Mr. President, less than a year ago, and before the fall of the regime, a young Syrian woman spoke before your august council from this seat, while my colleagues and I sat back there. She spoke against tyranny and oppression, bravely and consistently calling for freedom. She showed you a picture of one of the squares of the revolution from Syria. That square was the square of dignity in Suwaida, the square that continually called for freedom against oppression and tyranny. Today, and despite the wounds, these deep wounds and these unfortunate events that bloodied the hearts of Syrian men and women, Suwaida and its great people were and remain in the heart of every Syrian citizen, similar to all other Syrian governorates and every piece of our land, which was watered by the blood of Syrian men and women who fought for freedom and dignity. These painful events that took place in Suwaida were just as painful for the Syrian government as they were painful for the entire Syrian people. In this regard, allow me to express our deepest condolences to every Syrian family that lost a loved one during these tragic events. Therefore, the Syrian government made every possible effort to treat these wounds based on the concern of the Syrian government for the unity of the country. Therefore, we engaged in good faith and in a constructive manner in all the initiatives to resolve this crisis, which were culminated with the adoption of a roadmap to resolve the crisis in Suwaida and guarantee stability in the south of Syria, which was ratified during the tripartite meeting that was held in Damascus between the Syrian Arab Republic, the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan, and the United States of America. And yesterday, I met with my colleagues, the American ambassador and the permanent representative of the Kingdom of Jordan. I sent them a letter to adopt this roadmap as an official document with the Security Council and the United Nations. Mr. President, the first item on the roadmap was a call to the Independent International Commission of Inquiry on the Syrian Arab Republic to investigate the latest events, and the commitment of the Syrian government to hold accountable all the perpetrators of violations. And you all know that in this new Syria, we have worked on extending the mandate of the Commission, and we have cooperated with the Commission, an historic precedent. The Syrian government has already arrested a number of suspects accused of perpetrating violations from both the Ministry of Defense and Interior, and those were documented by a number of credible international media agencies. In this regard, we reaffirm that accountability should include all the perpetrators of violations without any exception or discrimination. The families of the victim should feel that justice was truly served. This roadmap aims to build trust gradually, strengthen national reconciliation, guarantee the delivery of humanitarian assistance, and restoring basic services, in addition to the reconstruction of damaged properties and villages. Furthermore, we will establish a local police force that includes all segments of the society and the governorate. We will strengthen an inclusive national rhetoric that celebrates diversity and rejects hate speech and extremism. It will also strengthen equality before the law and other items that represent an important step towards restoring stability in the south and strengthening the unity of the Syrian land and the Syrian people. Mr. President, Syria today is moving forward towards recovery and reconstruction. It is overcoming one phase after the other, following the liberation of the country from oppression. And after we've preserved state institutions, we filled the presidential void, we started a national dialogue. We have formed a diverse government based on competencies. And today, we continue our efforts to hold elections in line with the specificity of the interim phase and the post-conflict challenges in order to fill the legislative gap. And these elections, Mr. President, will be the first of their kind for decades. They will be based on a separation of powers. In this regard, we welcome the agreements between the High Electoral Commission and a number of civil society organizations. The government has decided that these elections will be a genuine opportunity for all Syrian men and women to participate in drafting the future of the country. The decrees regulating the elections will emphasize the representation of all Syrians and guarantee the participation of the most vulnerable categories. Women will be represented by a percentage of no less of 20% in the list of candidates. We have also paved the way for a judicial and media supervision. We have also called on international organizations and diplomatic missions to observe the electoral process. Syria believes that these elections, despite difficulties, despite challenges, will be a first step towards strengthening civil peace and building the institutions that represent Syrian men and women truly and embody their aspirations. Not only will the Syrian government take these political steps, it will also make great efforts to advance the economic situation. We have signed a number of agreements with friendly and sisterly countries. We have also signed memorandums of understanding with a number of international and global companies. Furthermore, the Syrians around the world are working together, organizing generous community campaigns to support recovery efforts after years of oppression and suffering. Colleagues, Syria condemns in the strongest terms the Israeli attacks and once again calls on the Security Council to take immediate action to condemn these attacks and prevent their reoccurrence, and to compel the Israeli occupation authorities to withdraw their forces from the Syrian territory, where they have expanded their operations over the past few months, to end their occupation of the Syrian Golan, pursuant to relevant UN resolutions, notably resolutions 242, 383 and 497. Mr. President, efforts expected from the international community to achieve a quantum leap at the humanitarian and developmental levels are still below expectations. A lot of Syrian men and women, as we have heard before, are suffering from a severe lack of basic services. They're also suffering from the challenges resulting from the dangerous and catastrophic impact of climate change and the worst drought wave in 3 decades. This wave has deprived the Syrian people from their basic needs in terms of water, and they are genuinely threatening our agricultural production and food security. Not to mention the pollution resulting from explosive remnants of war and the mines that are now an obstacle before the return of the refugees, IDPs, and the recovery of agricultural land. Despite the success stories that I have mentioned and that you have mentioned yourselves, overcoming these challenges requires mobilizing international efforts and strengthening a positive international engagement that supports Syria and the Syrian people, supporting programs to recover vital sectors, strengthening humanitarian and development programs, and honoring declared pledges to fund the humanitarian response plan. In this regard, allow me to express our thanks to the member states in the Security Council for the facilities they have presented to guarantee the participation of the Syrian delegation in this historic moment to participate in the work of the high-level week of the 80th session of the UN General Assembly. The Syrian government reaffirms its commitment to continue to cooperate and continue its partnership with the United Nations and its specialized agencies, and we call on the United Nations to strengthen their efforts to support the Syrian people during this critical phase of our history. In conclusion, Mr. President, Damascus, which has always been the heart of Syria and the symbol for its unity, will continue to bring together all Syrian men and women and will open its arms to them, regardless of their background and their religious affiliation. Their diversity is a source of strength and wealth. It proves that Syria was and continues to be strong despite all attempts at division. The Syrian people has a joint history and a great legacy, and they stand today united, looking towards the future, rejecting terrorism, hate speech, and extremism, turning the page on suffering and pain, determined to build a nation for all its people without exception and without exclusion or marginalization, a nation that is united, strong in its diversity, persistent in its sovereignty, free in its decision, and moving forward based on the will of its people towards a bright future created by the Syrian people together, men and women, young men and women. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Syrian Arab Republic for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Islamic Republic of Iran.
In the name of God, the compassionate and merciful, thank you, Mr. President. We thank a Special Envoy, Mr. Pedersen, and Under Secretary, Mr. Fletcher, for their informative and insightful briefing. We have taken note of the statement delivered by Ms. Majed Chulbajia. On the situation in Syria, I wish to make the following points. First, on the humanitarian situation. The humanitarian situation in Syria is dire and continues to deteriorate. critical funding shortfalls threaten life-saving aid operations, leaving millions of Syrians vulnerable. We commend OCHA, UN agencies, and humanitarian partners for their tireless effort to deliver assistance under extremely difficult circumstances. Full, safe, rapid, and unhindered humanitarian access to all affected communities in strict accordance with the principles of humanity, neutrality, impartiality, and independence is essential. Beyond the urgent need for humanitarian relief, Syria continues to confront profound economic challenges and an escalating food crisis, inflation, devastated infrastructure, broken supply chain, energy shortage, and recurring drought threaten the very survival of millions. These hardships are the direct result of years of unilateral coercive measures imposed in Syria, measures that are illegal, illegitimate, and in blatant violation of the Charter of the United Nations. These illegal measures gravely hinder recovery, obstruct reconstruction, and exacerbate the suffering of the Syrian people. They must be lifted in their entirety without condition to allow Syria to rebuild its economy, restore livelihood, and enable the safe and dignified return of refugees and internally displaced persons. Sanctions must never be used as instrument of political coercion or interference in Syrian internal affairs. Second, on the security situation. The ceasefire arrangement remains fragile, while insecurity persists in Sueda and other regions. Terrorist groups such as Daesh, Al-Qaeda, and affiliated foreign terrorist fighters continue to destabilize Syria and the wider region, seriously undermining regional and international peace and security. The Security Council must also not ignore the ongoing destabilizing and aggressive action of the Israeli regime in Syria. Iran emphasized that all foreign occupation must end. Israel's act of aggression, including repeated airstrike against Syrian territory, constitute flagrant violation of international law and the Charter of the United Nations. The Council must not remain silent on these violations. Third, on the political process. Lasting peace and stability in Syria can only be achieved through a comprehensive Syrian-owned and Syrian-led political process, free from foreign interference and coercion. This process must be genuinely inclusive of all communities. Excluding key groups would only deepen graveness, undermine legitimacy, and risk destabilizing an already fragile situation. Such a process must safeguard the legitimate rights and aspirations of all Syrians, while preserving Syrian sovereignty, independence, unity, and national institutions. In this context, we support the recent diplomatic engagement of the Special Envoy with Syrian authorities in Damascus regarding the inclusive political transition. Fourth, on the Iran principal position, we reiterate that the sovereignty, unity, and territorial integrity of Syria must be fully respected. Any attempts to impose external agendas or fragment the country is unacceptable. We are concerned by agendas or demands for federalization or autonomy. Mishandled, these aspirations could fuel fragmentation and renewed conflict. Address responsibility through an inclusive national dialogue under the auspices of the United Nations. They could instead contribute to reconciliation and stability. Iran will continue to support the Syrian people and their efforts to restore peace, stability, reconstruction, and national reconciliation, fully in the line with the will of the Syrian people themselves. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of the Islamic Republic of Iran for his statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Iraq.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm honored to deliver the statement on behalf of the Arab Group. I express my deepest gratitude to Mr. Geir Pedersen, Special Envoy of the Secretary General for Syria, and Mr. Tom Fletcher, Under Secretary General for Humanitarian Affairs and Emergency Relief Coordinator, for their valuable briefings. We listened to the important statement by Ms. Majd Shorbaji. We welcome the new permanent representative of the Syrian Arab Republic, His Excellency Ambassador Ibrahim Alabi, in New York. The members of the Arab Group are ready to continue to cooperate with the permanent mission of Syria to support the efforts by the Syrian government and the aspirations of the Syrian people at this delicate juncture. Mr. President, the Arab Group firmly supports and welcomes the efforts of the Syrian government to restore security and stability in all its territories. This includes the roadmap to resolve the Suwaida crisis and achieve stability in the south of Syria, which was adopted by the Syrian Arab Republic, the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan, and the United States of America at the tripartite meeting in the Syrian capital, Damascus. The Arab Group stresses the need to continue the comprehensive political process that is Syrian-led and Syrian-owned, based on intra-Syrian dialogue, away from any foreign interference. A process that would fulfill the aspirations of the Syrian people with all its components, and would further national reconciliation and civil peace, and would preserve the unity of Syria, its sovereignty and its territorial integrity. The Arab Group condemns in the strongest terms the repeated attacks by the Israeli entity on Syrian territories. We categorically reject any pretexts to justify these hostile policies against Syria. We warn of dubious Israeli attempts to exploit the internal situation in Syria to stoke sectarian strife. We call upon the Security Council to bear its responsibility and to compel the Israeli occupation authorities to stop their violations and to fully withdraw from all occupied Syrian territories, most notably the occupied Syrian Arab Golan, in implementation of Security Council resolutions, especially resolutions 242, 338, and 497, and to comply with the Disengagement of Forces Agreement of 1974. The Arab Group stresses the need to enhance humanitarian action in Syria. We call upon the international community to increase its funding for the humanitarian response plan that remains severely underfunded. This would contribute to fulfilling basic needs and creating conditions that are conducive to the safe, voluntary, and dignified return of the refugees and displaced people. We express our deep appreciation to the countries that are hosting Syrian refugees. We call for more international support to host countries that cannot bear this burden by themselves. In this context, the Arab Group welcomes decisions to lift economic sanctions that were imposed on Syria. Closing this file once and for all is necessary to alleviate the suffering of the Syrian people and to allow the government, the Syrian government, to effectively engage in early recovery efforts, reconstruction efforts, sustainable development efforts, and achieving security and stability. Mr. President, supporting Syria at this critical juncture is a moral and political obligation for the international community. It is important to mobilize efforts to enhance the different forms of international support to Syria that would include increasing investments and fostering economic cooperation to contribute to supporting security, stability, development, and reconstruction. That would guarantee building a secure and prosperous future that is commensurate with the aspirations of the Syrian people. The Arab group reiterates that the security and stability of Syria is part and parcel of Arab and regional security. Preserving the unity of Syria and the national institutions of Syria is the guarantee to prevent destabilizing the region and to fight terrorism in all its forms and manifestations and to prevent the resurgence of terrorist groups. The Arab group expresses its full support to efforts by Syria to counter terrorism, to secure the borders, and to fight the smuggling of arms and narcotics. It is important to support these efforts and enhance cooperation as part of supporting regional security and fighting transnational threats. The Arab group calls upon the Syrian government to continue cooperating with the international community to repel terrorist threats, to eliminate terrorism in all its forms and manifestations, and to uproot its sources. In conclusion, the Arab group expresses its full solidarity with the Syrian Arab Republic. We call upon the international community to enhance cooperation and mobilize efforts and invest in this opportunity to support the Syrian people in its path towards peace, stability, and development. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Iraq for his statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Turkey.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would also like to Special Envoy Pedersen, USG Fletcher, and Ms. Çorbacı Ehren. Syrian government has made remarkable progress since last December, despite the scale of challenges. Rehabilitation projects in infrastructure are already underway, and access to electricity in the country has improved. Reconstruction process will only accelerate once all natural resources come under the control of the Syrian government for the benefit of the whole Syrian people. We are encouraged to observe that Syria's engagement with the international community is advancing on a steady and constructive path. Participation of the Syrian president in the UN General Assembly during high-level week will be of enormous importance in reinforcing this engagement. Turkey will continue to support lifting of all sanctions as the Syrian government pursues its reconstruction agenda. Mr. President, the new period in Syria requires sustained efforts to ensure peace and stability on the basis of its territorial integrity and unity. A Syria that has re-established its sovereignty, territorial integrity, and stability is also key to preventing wider security risks. Empowering the Syrian government is essential to achieving this goal. From the outset, Turkey has facilitated mobilization of regional and international efforts to engage with the new government. It is important not to lose sight of the need to secure stability and security. Syrian government is committed to improving the safety and security of the country of all its people, and this should be supported. In this regard, we welcome the roadmap announced by Syria, Jordan, and the United States with the objective of preserving calm, ensuring stability, and preventing renewed conflict in Sueda province. Turkey will support initiatives that promote peace, security, and stability for all components, but it is also essential for Israel to reconsider its policy of aggression, of keeping Syria weak and fragmented, and to recognize that Syria's stability also serves for the security of all in the region. Mr. President, recent developments have also underscored the importance of a comprehensive and transparent political transition process supported by all segments of society. We hope that the upcoming People's Assembly elections will contribute to this end. It is equally important that Syrian government assume control in the northeast, including camps and detention centers. These would create the conditions for enhanced regional cooperation toward the definitive defeat of Daesh terror organization. International community should rely on the Syrian government to lead a credible, effective, and accelerated repatriation process from the camps. Establishment of a centralized administration, a national army, is indispensable for the unity and stability. National security must be ensured through a unified military under a single central authority-led chain of command. It is also noteworthy that the Syrian government's capacity to counter Daesh has been significantly reinforced over the past 9 months. The 10th March agreement between the Syrian government and the so-called SDF remains entirely unimplemented. SDF continues to play for time and has shown no interest in a united future for Syria. Hopefully, it will change. More pressure must be placed on the SDF to this end. Ideas and initiatives that carry the risk of fragmentation are not acceptable. Mr. President, keeping Syria on the track is our shared responsibility. The period ahead requires constructive engagement with the Syrian government and closer international cooperation. Turkey will remain fully committed to this vision. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Turkey for the statement. I now give the floor to Mr. Geir Pedersen to respond to comments.
Thank you, Mr. President. It's not really to respond to comments, but I have an announcement, or whatever you like to call it. So I wish to let the Council know that I have informed the Secretary General of my intention to step down after more than 6.5 years serving as the United Nations Special Envoy for Syria, and he has graciously accepted my request. Firstly, let me say, and let me really underscore this, I am, and I believe we all are, deeply indebted to and profoundly grateful to the Syrian people who have shown extraordinary courage and humanity throughout these years. And today we heard 2 very impressive voices from Madame Chorbachi and the new PR. And I'm going to miss listening to that. But as my family and colleagues know, it has been my intention for quite some time to move on for personal reasons after a long period of service. Yet, given the extraordinary changes in Syria and the opening of a new chapter, it has also been both my duty and indeed my privilege to remain in office and to help guide the United Nations political efforts in the first crucial months of this historical period of political transition. I will be departing in the near future, but I assure that I will remain fully engaged in my responsibilities until my final day in office. I again extend my deepest gratitude to the Secretary General for his trust and unwavering support, and indeed to my exceptional team for their tireless dedication, and to the Security Council for its sustained backing throughout this journey. It's been a pleasure. My experience in Syria has affirmed an enduring truth that sometimes it's darkest before the dawn. For so long, progress seemed absolutely impossible, until suddenly it came. Few have endured suffering as profound as the Syrians, and few have demonstrated such resilience and determination. Today, Syria and the Syrian people have a new dawn, and we must ensure that this becomes a bright day. They deserve this so much. Thank you once again.
I thank Special Envoy Pedersen for his further statement. The representative of Algeria has asked for the floor to make a further statement.
Thank you, President. I'm taking the floor first to say sorry. Sorry to Ms. Shurbaji. I omitted this morning in my statement to welcome you on behalf of the A3+. I can assure you that we, the A3+, have listened carefully to your very interesting presentation. Second, again, on behalf of the A3+, namely Guyana, Sierra Leone, Somalia, and my own country, Algeria, I want to express our deep appreciation to Mr. Pedersen for his tireless efforts in supporting the Syrian people and Syria in overcoming the consequences of a devastating conflict and navigating a most challenging transition period. His professionalism, his commitment, and his dedication have been invaluable throughout this journey, and we wish him all the best. Looking ahead, we hope that the new Special Envoy will bring renewed momentum to the role of the United Nations in Syria and help unite all efforts toward a single objective: support Syria and its people. The A3+ remain fully committed to working with all partners in pursuit of the best interest of Syria and a brighter future for its people. I thank you.
Thank you. I thank the representative of Algeria for the statement. The representative of Syrian Arab Republic has asked for the floor to make a further statement. I give them the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'll be speaking in English. On December 7th, both Mr. Pedersen and I were together in Doha when we've received the news that the regime has fallen. Being a special envoy for any conflict, let alone one that we Syrians know, is no easy job. I think everyone around this council can agree with me on this point. This is perhaps not unique to Syria, but Syria has presented incredible challenges for all the envoys that were bestowed with such a big responsibility. But what perhaps is unique to the Syrian situation in Mr. Envoy's departure is that he departs on a note of hope, on a success story, on a hopeful story, on well wishes for millions of Syrians that he endured so much criticism and so much pressure to be able to serve. I wish him and his family, who I'm sure endured equally as much during that period, all the best. And we look forward, Mr. President, in engaging with the Secretary General and all of you in working with his successor in a way that preserves Syrian sovereignty and fulfills the aspiration of the Syrian people.
I thank the representative of Syrian Arab Republic for the statement. I believe I can express the Council's gratitude for Mr. Pedersen's service during these challenging times I wish him the very best in his future endeavors. The Council will continue to work with him until the completion of his mission and stands ready to cooperate with his successor in supporting Syria and the Syrian people in their inclusive transition. There are no more names inscribed on the list of speakers. The meeting is adjourned.